welcome to this part 2 of how to play the pipe organ. Thank you to the thousands and thousands of people who've watched the first video for part 1 and also used the book to not only learn the basics of playing the pipe organ but maybe refresh skills they already had or move from the piano to the pipe organ. It's been wonderful to share that with you. Thank you for all your wonderful feedback. I'm glad you've enjoyed looking through the video and the book. And here on the second part, this is a video to accompany book 2, which is available from my website. And what we're going to do is build on the ideas and the repertoire and the techniques involved in book 1, give you a few challenges, but build the repertoire up so you've got great useful pieces which you'll be able to use for lots of occasions, and also present you with some great challenges along the way. We're also going to show you how to use the instrument much more, so let's get started straight away. The first piece we're going to look at is Mohrentanz by Susato, a very old style of music. And in book 1 we covered the technique of playing completely legato, which is sort of the standard articulation for playing the pipe organ. In this we're going to start looking at more varied articulations and the idea of space between notes. Just like when you're speaking, if every note is the same, you wouldn't normally speak in a monotone voice with no inflection because it sounds very odd and boring. You need to highlight certain words with maybe a space before them or to give them a bit more impetus. And that's exactly what we do in playing the pipe organ. Because on a sound like this, unlike the piano, the finger does not affect the volume or the accent of the note. So to do that, we have to do what we call agogics, or the length of the note within the rhythm. So if you want me to make that sound like a bar of 4 beats, instead of just equal notes, I can make the first note longer. Also worth noting is that the other notes are all articulated. So first of all, the way to learn to do this is play the note but have a space between every note. There's an equal tiny amount of light between every note. Then make one of them longer. This will vary from the instrument you're playing and the acoustic you're playing in. I'm going to give you a few exercises in the book to do this, such as a 5-finger exercise where you can slur notes and also paired notes. And if you follow these exercises, you'll learn how the notes articulate on the organ. And we'll use this in the first piece because, as you'll hear, the melody is well, the important thing here is the accompaniment. So every single note is disconnected from the next ever so slightly. Once again, if you just play chords, learn how much light you need between notes. Instead of just short or very long, where you can hardly hear a gap at all, just learn to have that little bit of daylight. And that's the articulation we'll be using in this piece. It's very subtle, and so you'll have to experiment. The same with the pedal and the right hand. In this piece we'll choose 2 different sounds. One on the great manual as the main sound, and I'll choose a second sound on the swell as a kind of echo sound. Now, we covered some ideas of registration in book 1. The basic idea is build up from an 8-foot pitch, the same pitch as written pitch or as you would play on a piano. So for example, that's an 8-foot flute. In this piece I'm going to start from the principal sound, which is the sound that you see in most organ pipes on the front of an organ, this sort of very strident forthright tone, typical sort of organ tone as it's sort of known really, and it builds up. So that's an 8-foot pitch. We then add 4 foot to it. We can then go to 2 foot above that, and then we can add mutations as well. On this organ we have things such as a 12th, which plays as the name suggests, 12 notes above the note you're playing. It's a mutation of sorts, and what it does is enhances the 8-foot pitch because it's part of the harmonic series. And if we add that sound, slight mixture sound in there, and then on top of that we can add the main mixture, which brightens the sound completely. Now when you're building up sounds at the organ, the important thing to always do is use your ears, and by that I mean you don't just pull out stops and then see what it sounds like, because you've no idea what will happen. What you need to do is hold notes and pull stops out, and by that way you can sort of you flavour the sound like you would do if you were cooking. You wouldn't just throw 5 spoonfuls of sugar or salt in and then see, you'd keep tasting as you go, and it's exactly the same idea. We'll cover it all again in a moment, but for this piece, as I said, we'll use an 8/4, 2 2/3 12, a 2-foot and a mixture on the grate. For the echo on the swell, we can use a contrasting sound of maybe a reed stop, such as a trumpet, horn or an oboe. Try the sounds to see which one provides a contrast. You could even add a 4-foot or 2-foot flute or principal to make the sound even more different. The pedal will be coupled to the grate. Add 16-foot flute and principal stops to balance the grate sound, then 8-foot flute and principal stops, and always remember to keep playing notes on the pedal and grate to make sure the sound blends well. We've covered the main principal sound of the organ as it's known, that very sort of organ sound. In the next piece, the Prière by Franck, we're going to cover some different sounds, more orchestral, very string sounds. Like the grate, the swell builds up in the same way through its principals, but we also have expressive stops, such as strings tone. And you'll hear in things, they'll be named gambas, solitionals, you name it. Quite thin sounding stops, and these are often used in combination with other stops. They can be used with a flute stop for a warm sound with a bit of an edge, or you can use it with a celeste stop, which is a stop which is usually tuned sharp, sometimes flat, and it gives a wavering sound. So if I play without it and then I add the string stop, the celeste, it has a little wavering sound. The sound is called voix céleste, the celestial voices. And on this organ, it's enclosed in what's known as an expression box or a swell box. And this is a large box with all the pipes inside with big shutters on the front, which is operated by the swell pedal. On this organ, it's the pedal on the right hand side, and when we open the pedal, it opens the box, and when we close it, it shuts the box, making the sound quieter. When you use the swell pedal, you'll be using it in between using the pedals of the organ as well, so both feet need to be available and equally trained to move the swell pedal independently. We'll start with our right foot though. If I hold the chord with the box closed, if I move the box just a small amount, not very much, it makes quite a lot of difference on the first part. If I close it again, and then if we open it much further, about halfway, Now we get to that point, the last part doesn't make as much difference. So if I open it the rest of the way, and then close it to about halfway again, that just shades the sound slightly. Then if I close it all the way, I have to slow down because the last centimetre or so provides the largest amount of difference. In this piece you can constantly use the swell box to provide expression for each phrase. So for example, the very first phrase, start with the box closed and gradually open to the second bar and close again, just to provide a little bit of shading in the sound. And I've provided in the score in the book the full registrations and also the expression marks for the crescendo and the decrescendo or diminuendos as you need to go through the piece to operate the pedal. The swell pedal can also be used to cover up the addition of stops. So for example, if I hold the chord again, once the box is open slightly, if I had a stop, say a flute, it comes on with a bit of a bump. So in between chords in this piece I've put some stops to be added, and what you can do is you can slightly open the box, and as you're going to add the stop you need to close the box to cover it up. So as I close, and then retake the chord, and that will just gently shade that stop being added so it doesn't come on with too much of a lump. In this piece, you will also need to add stops by hand, including grate to pedal. So far we've covered pulling out the stops and registrations of the organ by hand, but as you'll notice there are pistons and buttons for the feet and the thumbs of the organ all over the place, and every instrument all over the world will be completely and utterly different in how they operate and what they do. This instrument has a fairly standard system, so I'll start with the first part, which is divisionals. As the name suggests, the divisionals operate on each division of the organ. So for example, the buttons under the swell manual operate on the swell division, and the buttons under the great organ operate on the great division. The pedal organ division is operated down here with the toe pistons, and on this organ we also have swell toe pistons as well, which also operate on the swell. You need to learn your own instrument and find out what they do, and we'll look at how you set them. We'll start with an example for a two manual organ, for example, with a great, a swell and a pedal organ. On this organ I have 1 to 8 in divisionals, which is fairly standard for larger instruments. You may have less, you may have more. And what I tend to do is set them up to provide a crescendo. So if I play you what I've got set up at the moment, nothing. If I press 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and I'll list in the book which stops I've put on as I go along. The great is the same if we run through those. And then the pedal organ is the same, and we will add these this way. And what you want to do is make sure your great and pedal stops balance each other. They're the most important things to balance together. On most organs we have a stop called great and pedal pistons combined, which means that as I press the great pistons, it operates the great and the pedal at the same time. So as I'm using them, I can start at the beginning and hold a pedal note, which is handy in, say, hymn playing, which we're going to demonstrate now. There are various ways of setting the divisionals on the organ. Some organs have switches at the back of the organ or behind the music desk, but a universal, fairly standard system is a set button, usually down here under the bottom manual on the left. So if I want to set something on the great, perhaps, if I choose 8 and 4-foot harmonic flutes and I want them on great 1, what I do is I press the set button down here and hold it, choose the divisional I want it to go onto, which in this case is great 1, press great 1, release great 1, then release the set button. Now that's now set onto great 1, so every time I press great 1, 8 and 4-foot harmonic flutes come back out. Simple. Some of the thumb pistons you can see are not changeable. For example, the couplers, and we can have things like, instead of pulling out the great to pedal stop by hand, there's a thumb piston here which pushes it out. We also have swell to pedal, choir to pedal. These are really handy when you're playing and you need a quick coupler bringing out, and you can just press it with your thumb. In addition to divisionals, which just operate each division of the organ, on this instrument and most large instruments you'll have generals as well, which operate on the general organ, the whole instrument. So you can operate multiple divisionals for, say, a quick change or the beginning of a piece in a concert where you suddenly want the right stops to come out on all divisionals quickly without having to root around by hand or use separate divisionals. And what you do for this is very simple. You can choose the stops by hand and set them, or you can choose them by divisional, however you want to do it. So if I'm starting a piece with a fairly big sound, I'll choose, say, a sound on the swell, I'll choose a sound on the great, I'll couple them together, I'll add the pedal as well and couple the great and the swell to the pedal. So if that's my setup for a piece, and I want that to come on very quickly at the touch of a button, I can choose one of these generals. On this organ, they're on the left hand side, numbered 1 to 8. Again, you might have less, more. They could be above the keyboard on the right hand side or somewhere else on the instrument. Again, press the set button and hold. If I'm going to put this on a general number 1, I'll press number 1 general and release, and then release the set button. Now, if I put all stops back in and press general 1, the sound I'd prepared is saved on there. When you've reached the end of the piece, most organs have a very handy thumb piston, which is usually down here on the bottom right hand side. It was named General Cancel or Cancel, and it cancels all the stops on the organ. So if I've finished a piece, I can press General Cancel and every stop has gone in. It's a good habit to get used to cancelling stops when you've finished playing, because I've seen some terrible accidents in church services where the organist has left a full organ sound on, and as they've turned round, caught the organ, or the hymn book has fallen down and onto the keys. So a quick cancelling, no stops. It's safe to move around at the organ then. We can put all this into practice now in a practical way by trying a hymn tune. Hymn tunes are a great way of learning to add, subtract stops and also operate the swell boxes to cover up sounds being added. The main sound you want to cover up being added is the swell. Important to notice that on the grate it's unenclosed, so the sound is always there, and behind that you're always adding to the swell sound. So with the box, when I want to add another sound, I need to close the box and then open it again so it doesn't come on with too much of a bump. You'll experiment with this, but I'm going to play through the hymn Abide With Me. The first time I'll play it through and I will use divisional thumb pistons, and then the second time I'll demonstrate it through using hand registration. And to begin with, I've set up a general which will bring out the stops I want to begin with. It's worth noting that if you're playing an organ like this with traditional draw stops on it, when you go to pull out the stops from the keyboard, your hands move in a specific way. You go from the keyboard and the natural movement is for your hands to turn that way. It's the shortest distance then to the stops. As you get to the stops, you'll notice that if you use your hands in this way, you can pull 2 stops, 3 stops, 4 stops all at once. Whereas if you try and go the other way with your hand downwards, you also block the view of your own eye line with the name of the stop, and you can't tell the distance where the stop is, and it makes it difficult to find and pull out the stops. So it's always better to go for it from almost underneath sideways is the sort of motion you're going for a safer way of viewing and pulling out your stops. We're going to move on to a piece by Johann Sebastian Bach, the Prelude and Fugue in C major, known as the Little Prelude and Fugue. It's one of the earliest organ pieces I learnt, and it's a great way of learning the music of Bach, providing a useful piece for concerts or church service even, and also it gives you the first introductions to articulation. As we've already mentioned in the first Susato piece, to show articulation, in Bach's time the standard articulation was for every note to have a slight separation. The best way of judging this at the instrument you've got is to try playing a scale of notes with one finger. So for example, in Bach's time, that would be a fairly sort of standard articulation, and from that we add variety to it. So we want certain notes to be stressed and certain notes to be shorter. In this piece, it's in 4 in a bar, and so we're in groups of 4. If I play you the manual part with no articulation at all, it's completely plain. If I over-exaggerate and give the beats of the bar a slurred exaggeration so the notes are longer, you get this, which is a bit heavy on each beat. So we're going for somewhere in between. You can begin by playing this piece through maybe just the manuals and the pedals, or all separately as we've done in previous books, but choose a sound which is bright enough so you can hear. For this we're going to use an 8, a 4 and a 2 just for now, just so you can hear. And if I give you these manual parts, and what I want to give you is an idea of articulation which is exaggerated. So if we slur every beat, there's more exercises for this in the book of various slurs and articulations, but what we need to do then is to tone that down, and so we don't have the note quite so long on the downbeats. What we want to end up with is 2 beats in a bar, so the first beat and the third beat are going to be slightly longer and heavier, and the rest of it have this very light articulation. Also, the same goes for the larger groups. That's for the semiquavers, but also for the quaver groups, the 8th notes, we want the same sort of idea. So when we've got these bars from say bar 5 onwards, we've got groups of just 4 notes. Now you can make the first 2 notes of each group slurred together, which makes it feel heavier on each beat, and then you can tone that down and make sure it's just the first one in each bar, like this. And this gives you the pulse of each bar, and if you stick to this for now, you will learn this basic idea of articulation to give weight to certain notes. In this piece we're also going to include some trills. You can miss them out if you want, however they're often a bit of a point where people get scared and slightly tense, and there's nothing to be afraid of. They're generally just ornaments and trills, and as the name suggests, they're something beautiful, a decoration which you include to enhance the music. Sometimes it's to enhance the dissonance of the notes in the harmony, and sometimes it's just to elongate the notes in a beautiful way. If we take the first trill in this piece in bar 11, what we're going to do is I would include something from an upper note. So the written note is A, but the harmony suggests that the B is a dissonance. So if we start from the upper note, which is a B, and we do a short trill, you can first of all start by playing a slower rhythm, something quite straightforward, almost just in semiquavers really. But the idea of trills is that you're just playing 2 notes. It's basically, it's as simple as that, and it's training the 2 fingers of whichever you're using, in this case 3 and 2, to operate independently but also separate to each other, so they go from one to the other without causing any tension. You must stay relaxed. As we said in book 1, keep your arm relaxed at all times. The main place where people tense up in trills is in the forearm, which makes their hand lock almost. And an exercise for this is to do rhythms. So if we're doing a trill which starts on a B to an A, always know where you're going to, so you know the harmonic consequences of what you're playing, and then choose maybe a metronome mark at a slow speed and do a repeated note action. So I use the following rhythm, which is written down in the book for you. Individually, and then both fingers one to the other, and that can be repeated, and you can up the metronome mark bit by bit. And when you do this, keep the hand still and just move from the knuckles. The arm remains passive, and this sort of relaxed motion will give you perfect trills really, and we can end up with in this we're going to have two sounds altogether, one on the great manual, and we'll use an echo as well, where we'll take great pedal off at that point. It's all written in the book in exactly the right place, and you can use a thumb piston or a toe piston as you wish to do that. But for the sounds involved, on Bach's organs you would use a general principal chorus on the great, so diapason, adding a 4/4, and then add the 2 2/3 and 2. You could add the mixture on top with the pedal to balance to that. But for the echo sound, an effect which is often used is called a gapped registration. Now this is where, instead of going from 8 to 4, we miss out 4 and go straight from 8 to 2, which gives a very tinkly sound, because you're playing 2 octaves apart with one note. So on this one I'm going to use it on the swell. next piece is The Swan by Saint-Saëns, a very famous piece of music, but we're going to have a little bit of fun with this one and play the melody with our feet. Now, it might seem a bit unusual, but it's great to learn to use the feet as an independent part, and this works perfectly. We need to play it at 4-foot pitch, so 1 octave higher than written. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to couple through from the great manual, 4-foot stops through to the pedal. So instead of us being at normal 16-foot pitch or 8-foot pitch, we're going to go an octave higher, couple the great through, a 4-foot on the great, and this will give us this. The swell is going to be the manual which plays the accompaniment. And what you need to do is find a volume where you can begin and accompany the melody at the right volume by using the box and closing it. So to find that volume, play the chord, try the pedal part. It's a little bit loud, a bit less, I'd say around there. And then we can begin the In addition to the difficulty of playing a melody with the feet, you can practice this first of all by learning the manual parts at the piano or the organ in the ways we've described before and playing the foot parts separately. But the difficulty, of course, is the fact that your hands are going to be playing here and you can't remove the top part of your body. So your body has to pivot, as before, from the waist here, but without affecting the upper part of the body. Once again in the book I've included the points where the feet need to move forwards and backwards and the body needs to pivot from the waist and the hips. And in this what we're going to do is some other techniques as well. A new technique which you won't have used before, which is using the black note to black note, the sharps of the pedal board, one by one with the toes of the foot. Now obviously you can't use the toes because the toes are pointed. We're using the inside of the foot and slightly unorthodox, the outside of the foot a little as well. And the technique for this, if I show you lower down, if I play low F sharp, I have to move to the outside of the foot and then play the next G sharp with the inside of my foot. If I was carrying on, you slide onto the outside of your foot and carry on to the A sharp. And so I've included an exercise. The same goes with the right foot because you get a scale in this piece where you need to use this, where you'll need to show F sharp, G sharp with the outside, A sharp with the outside, I also include the motion of moving from the long notes to the sharp notes as well with the heel. And this is where you have to have a very relaxed ankle because your whole foot is moving very, very gently just from your ankle joint and going around and using your whole leg, but don't move up and down too much. It's a very, very subtle motion, and this is where the correct shoes and the correct posture and the correct positioning all come into play. We also introduce arpeggios with one foot. The book contains further scales and arpeggios for the keys of all the pieces we've included in the book today, but also in this piece you'll see that we need to use arpeggios with one foot, which is quite a tricky manoeuvre because you're leaving a gap between a note, and this is where you need an instep on your shoe slightly enough to play a third at once. So if we're doing the G major arpeggio of D, B, G, B, you need to play the first note, prepare the second and play. Prepare the toe across, back again, then move. Try not to tense your foot. Your shoes should have enough support to allow the instep to miss the note in between. You can try playing it in thirds and then seeing the angle you need to turn to play the next third. and get used to that motion. And there's exercise in the book for both feet to do this.
The next piece is Schubert's Serenade, a very beautiful melody, and what we're going to use in this is the entire instrument that's available here. If you've got an organ which has 2, 3, 4 manuals, they'll generally be laid out in a certain way. The general English version is the quiet or positive as the bottom manual, the great as the second manual, the swell as the third manual, and if you do have a fourth manual, it'll be some form of solo or bombard. Now the bottom manual generally has the quieter stops, and the top solo manual will have stops such as flutes, clarinets, tubas, as the name solo suggests, for very solo lines, and that's what we're going to do in this piece, the Schubert Serenade. Different to other pieces you've done so far, the pedal line has quite large gaps. So the left hand and the pedal act as an accompaniment together. So when we begin, so we have to judge the length of the pedal notes. Too short and it doesn't work. If you give it its full length, it's a bit heavy, and it's somewhere in between, judging by the acoustic of the building and the instrument you're playing. So the sound sort of disappears into the second beat. If you have a fourth manual with a solo, it may be in another expression box, a solo box this time, and the same principle applies as for the swell box. The sound, here we're going to choose a clarinet. which sounds like a clarinet, as you would imagine. The box again can affect the sound. And balance the solo line to the swell line and this piece. And what we're going to do is we'll begin with the swell box closed for a very quiet sound, and then we'll just gradually open the solo box to let the melody balance to the swell, and then we'll open the swell box as we go along. All the time you need to be judging in tandem each part and how it balances. And if you can't always hear from the instrument, get somebody else to listen. Use a recording device, your phone, anything, just to record out in the building so you can hear how stops, when they're added, affect the sound and what volume they are. I've included stop changes in this piece, and as you'll see, you can do them either by hand if you have a hand free, and if you don't, you can use thumb pistons or set up some generals to do this. And you'll notice that as you're playing, you'll need to learn how and which finger or thumb you're going to use, because every instrument is different. So as you watch through the video, see what I do, but sometimes things will change because you might have a button in a different place and have to use a different hand. Next is Dido's Lament by Henry Purcell. Very beautiful piece of music, but also very expressive. The pedal part is straightforward, it's repetitive all the way through, so that gives you a chance to concentrate on the expression and the addition of stops. I've given suggestions based on what I've done here today, but you may just need to change as you go along. You might want to write in the stop you're going to do, more hairpins, dynamic lines of where you're going to open and close boxes if you know the instrument well. And sometimes when you arrive at an instrument, you might not have much time at all. One other thing to cover is also how you write registrations in. There are various abbreviations for stops which are included in the book, but also you might want to learn a way of including what a divisional or a general or a toe piston looks like. You might want to use your own system. For example, some people write generals in, say, a triangle and a divisional inside a circle, so when they look, they know what they're going for. You might want to abbreviate the manual names in a different way. S S for swell, G for great. You might be in a different country with different names, in which case you'll have to come up with your own system. Everyone has their own ideas based on what they're going to do. So it's a very generalized approach, but hopefully the sound of this piece will give you an idea of what to do with it. Next we have Mozart's Laudate Dominum, a very, very beautiful melody, once again with the pedal and the left hand providing the accompaniment in tandem. So you need to learn to make that work absolutely flawlessly as an accompaniment, as if you're playing for a singer, which is originally for. Then the melody is in the right hand. I've given the registrations and I'll demonstrate it using the solo manual as well as the great and the choir. But you can, if you want, just stick to playing the accompaniment with the left hand and the melody with the right hand on the great, the left hand on the swell. You can simplify it as much as you like. The important thing with this is to make it very expressive. And as I've said with the other parts of our articulation, This is basically legato we should be playing now, but we've got spaces. But the way to make expression is in the rhythm of the notes. So if we're playing the figuration, which is the accompaniment, if we need to take time, it's the rubato involved. And rubato is a very difficult thing to master. You learn this by playing for choirs, soloists, violinists, accompany them on the piano, and you'll learn a general sense of musical phrasing, and that's what this piece highlights absolutely perfectly. Things should move and stretch very gradually, just like if you bounce a ball on the floor, you always know where it's going to land. It doesn't suddenly jump up and down in in an erratic fashion. It all moves and stretches in a very gradual way, and the notes in between do that as well. So when you've got your pulse of this piece of 1, 2, it should just feel like that's your pulse, and then the melody. Learn to feel in bigger beats, don't think in the smaller notes. Once again in this piece we have ornaments, trills, turns this time, and little scale figurations which are decorations of the melodic line, and they should reflect the beauty and the feel of the line as such. The first one comes in bar 14, which can be played as a turn, which is this. Essentially 5 notes. Once again, stay relaxed, keep your fingers close to the keys, and just... That's literally all we're playing. You can simplify it by just playing a note above. If it's too much to do the 5 notes. But the idea of this is to practice them in the same way as I gave before, with that repeated tapping motion, but in both ways, which is written out in the book. Also, we get a trill near the end, which is a long trill across a whole bar. And the important thing to remember with this is that because you're reflecting the sort of relaxed feel of this piece, you don't want to just play a trill really quickly, what I call a sort of doorbell trill, where you see a trill sign and people sometimes just play really fast. It would be completely inappropriate to play. It's too fast for the music. So don't feel like when you do a trill you have to feel tense or play too quickly or attack it in any way. It develops from the written note in this case. So it's not very fast at all. So they can be quite relaxed and gentle and fit in with the music perfectly.
Finally, to finish with, a very, very grand and well-known piece of music, La Réjouissance by Handel from Music for the Royal Fireworks. This gives the opportunity to use some of the very, very big sounds of the organ up to full organ by the end. I've given the registrations in the book, and you can add them by a general or divisionals or by hand as you go along. And if you're lucky enough to have something like a tuba sound on the top manual, something, you can begin on that and use the manual change to jump down to the rest of the sound. I hope you've enjoyed this video and it's provided useful information as well as some great pieces to learn in Book 2. The book's available in digital format from my website, and it includes the notes for all the pieces, as well as the pedalings, fingerings and all the additional exercises and information. And I hope it helps you on your organ playing journey.